Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. A potentially major blow for Red Bull's rival today, with the big rumours over the last couple of months that Adrian Newey is being targeted heavily by Aston Martin, Ferrari and others. Those negotiations seem to have broken down, and Newey will be staying at Red Bull for the immediate term and potentially for the long term as well, unless a last minute offer was to potentially come through right about now. That was too good to refuse. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, we've got to talk on this man Fernando Alonso, because he has signed this long-term extension with Honda and Aston Martin, basically Aston Martin, but the partnership with Honda is one of the key reasons why. He even mentioned the fact that Lewis Hamilton will also be 40, so it won't just be him that people are talking about being the oldest driver on the grid. Funny actually that Hamilton, despite being around a long time, has never been the oldest driver on the grid, I'm pretty sure. Kimi Räikkönen, before he retired, just at the same time that Alonso came back into the sport, right? So Hamilton's never been the oldest driver on the grid. He may never be the oldest driver on the grid, depending when himself and Alonso potentially retire, and just how long Fernando keeps on going for. But the decision for Alonso will need to be made, according to the guys at Formula Uno, in basically 2026, whether he stays as a driver, or let's say even 2027, or whether he decides to retire but stay on as part of the Aston Martin family. That is seemingly the plan. Alonso said it's the longest term deal that he's ever signed. He signed like a 5-year deal with Ferrari back in the day, so this is a longer term arrangement post his racing career with Aston Martin, and it seems to be that Alonso will take on some sort of other role from even like a managerial perspective at the team. So, I don't think that would necessarily be a team principal role immediately, but honestly, who knows how Alonso might get involved here. And yeah, the feeling is that he might take on a Niki Lauda at Mercedes-esque role when he, when the time comes, as it were, and when he decides that he's had enough of driving, or whether he himself admits that when he knows he hasn't got it anymore like he used to, then he'll step away. But let's be honest, we'd have thought that would have happened to Alonso by now, and it clearly hasn't happened yet. So that is the plan with Alonso. A role comparable to Lauda at Mercedes is not ruled out, and is likely potentially to move into a managerial position with Aston Martin in the long term. Kind of like maybe how Pedro Della Rosa is an ambassador for Aston Martin right now. Maybe Alonso will be something similar. Be cool to see Alonso step into another role at some point in the sport, become the FIA boss or something in the longer term. But for now, he will stay driving, and he will stay driving, I'm sure, for as long as he is good enough to do so. Of course, Alonso's deal means that Sainz, as we discussed yesterday, a bit of a trickier spot with the Aston Martin option no longer on the table unless they were to fire Stroll, which is rather unlikely. And Sainz has actually made it quite clear that he would like to get this done relatively quickly. He's one of those drivers, I think understandably, that's somewhat nervous really when you've been great but you don't have a drive for next season. So you kind of want to get things locked down, so at least that part of your mind is locked in, and you no longer have to worry about securing a drive for next year, because when that's in the back of your mind, sure, it might even make you perform better when you know your job's on the line and you need to impress other people, but also it's very stressful, I'm sure, to not have a locked down drive in the sport for next year. So we talked yesterday that, Williams and Sauber, that will become Audi, are options for Sainz, and potentially he can go to those teams if he wants to, but arguably those should be backup options. And this is when the Mercedes rumoured offer, we talked yesterday that there's a rumour that Mercedes have offered Sainz a 1+1 deal, which is the same as they offered Hamilton, and Hamilton said no, I'll take the Ferrari 2+1, and Sainz maybe wants a longer term deal, but apparently Mercedes have said, look, we'll bring you on for a year. We have the right, I imagine, whether we extend that or not, so that they can put Antonelli in the car when they want to. Sure, Sainz would be a bit of a seat warmer in this situation, but he also does have the chance to outscore Russell, outperform Russell, and therefore potentially maintain the spot in the team in the longer term, as maybe Mercedes make a bit of a comeback. But that's the question really for Sainz. When do you lock this down? Do you bide your time? Do you keep your options open? Or do you lock this in? Because Mercedes are going to bide their time, I think. They will wait, and they need probably a few more rounds from Kimi Antonelli to know whether he is going to be good enough to go straight into their car. But then again, if you're Sainz and you're saying, look, Mercedes, let's get pen to paper now, Toto Wolff might say, you know what, all right, let's do it. Sainz comes in, leave Antonelli for another year. Either he does another year of Formula 2 if he doesn't win it, or maybe you send him to Williams potentially. But right now, the performance delta in terms of championship standings between Williams and Mercedes is far from as great as maybe it once was. So that's the question for Sainz. Do you, if the Mercedes offer exists, lock this down now and get that seat signed? Or do you say, all right, let's bide our time a little bit and just hope, let's say, that the Red Bull seat becomes available? Because at this point, with Ferrari out of the question, with McLaren out of the question, with Aston Martin out of the question, we believe, it's either Mercedes or it's Red Bull for Sainz, realistically speaking, unless he wants to join those other options I mentioned earlier. Red Bull is the most attractive seat, but Red Bull, according to what we saw yesterday, they didn't offer Alonso a drive. They, weren't willing to appreciate the risk that might create to the internal dynamics, which are already questionable enough at Red Bull. Bringing Alonso in could cause a complete explosion, which Jos Verstappen predicted, of course, if Christian Horner was to say. But if Perez does underperform from now onwards, right? We know that last year he was great, really, up until Miami, and then it all fell apart. I don't expect that to happen in quite the same way this year, but I do see a world where Sainz could potentially score more podiums this year than Perez is capable of. And if Perez does regress as he did last year, there would be a good case to put Sainz in the car instead. Yes, there would be the behind-the-scenes drama between the Sainz family, the Verstappen family, but it's something worth of consideration. So I think Sainz has to kind of make a call, assuming the Mercedes offer exists, lock that down, or give it a month, give it 6 weeks, just to see how the Red Bull situation unfolds and whether that's potentially an option, because you don't really want to sign the Mercedes offer and then Perez gets fired because he underperforms, or even Verstappen leaves or something if Marco was to go and that chaos actually comes back to the surface, and then all of a sudden Sainz has bottled the chance to go to Red Bull. So maybe Martin Brundle's idea of biding your time is slightly better, because let's say Sainz did bide his time and then was able to join Red Bull, then what could Mercedes do? There has been talk about Valtteri Bottas as well, because sure, he had a bit of an underwhelming 2023 in part, but I do think that over the last several races he has shown that he's certainly a more competent driver than Zhou Guanyu is, and is kind of reasserting himself with that team. The problem is the team is so underwhelming. The last 6 races he has finished lower than he has started. Not all his own fault, because these are the pit stops so far this season for Valtteri, and the less said on this the better. He has experience with bad pit stops, Monaco, Mercedes most certainly comes to mind, but the consistency on this has been frustrating. And of course Bottas himself is looking to secure a deal. He wants a contract extension. The issue is for Stake, or for Audi Sauber as they're going to be, they are in also an interesting position, because they are probably going to sign Hülkenberg. That seems to be what's going to happen now, and they would like Sainz. Their ideal Audi Sauber partnership is going to be Sainz Hülkenberg, but I would trust that probably Sainz won't go there, at which point maybe they'll keep Bottas, but unfortunately for Bottas, it doesn't seem like that's going to be locked down anytime soon, so he's going to look for an extension. That may or may not happen right now. These are the other drivers, by the way, that are going to be free agents without contracts for next season, and there aren't too many particularly attractive seats left on the market as it stands, especially for, in my opinion, solid drivers, the likes of Gasly and Ocon. Just aren't too many options out there. And of course, if Perez was to become available, if Red Bull get rid of him, then you'd think he'd walk into a reasonably decent seat. Ricciardo, though, is a key talking point to keep note of, because Tsunoda has outperformed him every round, I would say, this season. Sure, Ricciardo finished ahead in Bahrain after the highly controversial team orders at the end of that Grand Prix based on the tyre deltas and all this type of stuff. He is so slow, famously Tsunoda basically saying. But this weekend is going to be quite telling for Ricciardo, because in qualifying he wasn't as far away from Yuki and Suzuka as he has been for the last couple of races, and he will have a new chassis in China. So this has been prepared now for some time. This apparently, according to RB, was always going to happen, but Ricciardo has been saying for some time now that he's not sure that his chassis is as good as Tsunoda's. I don't really know why he believes that, but his feeling was, certainly in Australia, that the lap time he put in qualifying, even though he went outside of track limits, he simply would not have been able to do the lap time that Yuki did to get through to Q3. So Ricciardo thinks, well, am I washed? Am I just not good enough anymore? Or is there something wrong with my car that the engineers can't quite figure out? Let's be honest, I'm tempted to believe the former of the two, but this weekend will be the tester, because a brand new chassis for Ricciardo in China, that will take out of any of those questions, and the sporting director basically says, not going to make a difference, this chassis change, but we had a new one prepared, so we're going to give it to Ricciardo anyway, and if he underperforms Tsunoda again in China, that might well be it. In terms of his challenge to try and become Max Verstappen's partner at Red Bull, which seemed rather likely a few months ago, seems rather less likely now. We'll also quickly mention on Andretti, because Haas, for example, have 300 employees. The top teams in the sport, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari, these kind of guys, they have well over 1,000. Andretti, their plan is to employ 1,100 staff in their F1 team. So Do they know that they've been told no, you can't join? You know what I mean? Like, the way that they're acting, it's like, yep, we're coming in and we'll be turning up for the first race in Bahrain next season. Actually, it's Australia, isn't it? First race next season. And then they turn up and they're like, guys, you know you weren't invited, right? Like, you've got this factory, got all this setup, but we didn't actually allow you in. But they are acting as if they have been accepted effectively. And I like it, you know. Let's keep it going, because Andretti are convinced that they will get into the sport, certainly with their General Motors partnership from 2028, if not sooner. And there is a good argument to say that the Alpine team that may be on the market could be a good target there as well. But everything you hear from Andretti is almost like they're actually being accepted. And maybe that's a positive mental attitude and way to look at it. But let's talk about Adrian Newey and this whole Ferrari situation, because Ferrari are making big acquisitions. They are bringing many engineers into their team. They've brought on Loic Serra from Mercedes. They are bringing others into Ferrari in the near future as well. The feeling still is they're looking at Pierre Wache, for example, from Red Bull as well, their technical director, and it feels like they will get other top names Ferrari, especially in the wake of Hamilton joining as well. That's going to attract a lot of interest to that Ferrari project, and no doubt Vasseur and Elkan, they've been cooking up a bit of a masterpiece. Doesn't mean though they'll get everything they want, and this is what we're going to discuss in a second. Just to compare, by the way, this is last year versus this year telemetry at Suzuka. Now yes, the SF23 wasn't an especially strong car, but the Japan upgrade was actually very good last year, and still their car this year was 7 seconds, 7/10 of a second a lap quicker than it was last year. Especially sector 1, you guys can see actually the relative speed differences through these first corners, and just compare even turn 14, 12 kph up on what was the case previously, which of course is spoon corner, right? So you see a lot of the high speed corners, massive improvements in race telemetry. And actually comparing so far this season, this is the data on race pace between last year and this year. And we can see considerable improvements for the Ferrari, and actually some quite considerable improvements for the Red Bull, but not as much as the Ferrari. Every single race so far this year, Ferrari have improved more with respect to last year than Red Bull have, which should be expected, but nonetheless it's quite interesting to see, because if this trend continues, you can see here that last year to this year, now sure, Perez had some damage in this performance and there was no Verstappen in the Grand Prix, but let's even exclude Australia as a bit of an outlier. Every other track, Ferrari have gained half a second year on year, pretty much, compared to what Red Bull have gained. So, you know, you fast forward 12 months and you think, well, in 2025, we might have a serious challenge on our hands. And it would be classic Formula One if the very final year of the regulations, we have a mega championship fight between Red Bull and Ferrari. This year, it's probably not going to happen, let's be honest, but it is plausible on current trajectories that Ferrari next year put together a genuine championship challenge. And we sometimes see this at the end, you know, the final year of the regulations or whatever, when the cars have actually closed up and then we get a proper championship battle. And then 2026 comes around, somebody nails it, and we go again, you know, like another period of dominance for whoever the driver-partner pairing might potentially to end up being that time. And there's even an argument that given the 2026 regulations are apparently not going especially well, they might be delayed even to 2027. That would be interesting to see how it would play out. Maybe another free championship for Max at Red Bull, but we'd see. But actually, Sainz has said that he believes by a third of the season in, so pretty much Imola really is when we're talking about. That's when the Ferrari upgrades are due to arrive. That is when Sainz believes they can genuinely close the gap to Red Bull. And his feeling is, yeah, they're going to have an advantage for the first third of the year, but after we bring upgrades, we'll be able to fight them. Might be too late at that point in the championship, but they do believe they can fight for race victories. But fighting for race victories in the longer term is of course about continually improving the car. The RB20 might not be perfect, but it is still absolutely the best car on the grid as it stands, and clearly Adrian Newey has had much to do with that. He gets all the credit, not all of the credit, he gets a large part of the credit for these Red Bull designed cars, and obviously for very good reason, with his heritage and what he's done and being the most successful designer ever in Formula One. Does he get overrated? I think it's kind of impossible to overrate Adrian Newey, but does he get more credit than sometimes he deserves? There's an argument to be made there. Of course, he does have a great technical team around him, but there's others that say, well, actually, Newey does effectively lead the design decisions, and without him, they would be not lost, but a severely weakened technical outfit. And there is an argument to be said that Adrian Newey is the most important man in Formula One. from a driver side, I'm sure every team would love Max Verstappen right now, but from an engineering perspective, every team would take Adrian Newey in a heartbeat. Given the internal situations at Red Bull, the Christian Horner, Helmut Marko situation, which has certainly calmed down somewhat over the last few weeks, but it's still possible that there are further repercussions there, and I don't feel like we've heard the last of that story. It was apparently now or never for these other teams to try and lure Adrian Newey away. We know that Aston Martin have been in contact. The belief is that either they're going to get bought out entirely by Aramco, or they've got like big money flooding in either from Aramco or other sources to try and take Aston to the next level. The rumour was a while ago they'd effectively given Newey a blank cheque to say, hey, come and work for us. And that may well be a very attractive offer and a difficult one to refuse, because if you're offered an absurd amount of cash, potentially ownership and equity in the team, the chance to work with Fernando Alonso, or even maybe as the intention of Aston was, to try and lure Verstappen over, because let's say Max was to stay at Red Bull, but Newey was to go to Aston Martin and build a great car there in 25 and potentially 26 as well. The Honda partnership, Alonso might step away. Maybe there's an argument that Verstappen joining Aston Martin over the next couple of years is a legitimate possibility if Newey was to go. And the other point, of course, for Newey is, especially at his age, does he really want to move abroad, take the family abroad, go to Maranello, and the other complications that English engineers often have when it comes to joining Ferrari or just any team that is based outside of the UK. That's why Aston may have been a rather attractive prospect because of what they could offer Newey, but also the fact that he's still working in the UK, working down in Silverstone. That makes maybe a fair bit of sense. Whereas joining Ferrari, despite being top of the list, I'm sure, for John Elkann, for Fred Vasseur and those guys to get the deal done, and even though some believe that Pierre Wache is even maybe more important than Newey is to their team, and they want him as well, we'll see what Vasseur can cook up over the coming couple of months. But yeah, Ferrari have, publicly, there's been rumours that they were interested in Newey, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were. Obviously, they actually haven't denied any of those conversations. And even AMUS, we saw them say this 48 or so hours ago, that yes, Ferrari and Aston are trying to get Newey. But as of today, motorsport.com say that as it stands, it seems more likely than ever that Newey will be staying at Red Bull. Because there was some talk that Newey and Horner have a very good relationship, and if Horner was to go, then Newey will quite possibly go. And that's when things in that Red Bull camp, I'm sure there's more to this than we have seen yet, because the feeling is that if Horner stays, then Marko might go, or Jos Verstappen might go, and therefore the Verstappen camp is in an interesting spot, but also Newey likes working with Horner. So if Horner was to go, then Newey might go, and it's like, well, who's more valuable at that point? Like, what's happening internally? I'm sure there are conversations being had, but at least from the outside world, things have somewhat calmed down, and going from a situation where Newey leaving Red Bull seemed like a realistic possibility, now with everything somewhat calming down, it seems somewhat more stable, and probably somewhat more likely that Newey stays. And given his age, maybe it makes sense to maintain the status quo, especially because there are other reasons why Newey would want to stay. He's working on the hypercar project as well. There were, to be fair, other reasons why Red Bull might have to push him aside, just because of the cost cap. Newey gets paid a lot of money, obviously, but right now he doesn't work full-time on the Formula 1 project. He only works a certain percentage of his time, and therefore Red Bull can only account for a certain percentage of his salary towards the cost cap. That is at least the rumour, depending on how Newey's getting paid, whether he fits under the top 3 earners that are able to be excluded. But basically the FIA are saying, right, no more of this percentage BS going forward. If you work on Formula 1, your full salary is counted, and therefore Red Bull apparently won't have enough money to pay for everyone they want. And they might say, Newey, look, we're going to force you effectively to work full-time on the Red Bull hypercar, the RB17 project, which I'm sure he wants to keep on doing, but that may not necessarily be his plan. But Joe Sauer did say that the other day, that those who are discussing Newey leaving have got to consider that he is working on the next Red Bull kind of like hypercar project, and therefore, maybe it's more unlikely than it is likely right now. So yeah, Motorsport, the Spanish side of just Motorsport in general, are saying that, yeah, right now it seems increasingly likely Newey will stay at Red Bull for the longer term. But sure, maybe contract negotiations have got to a point where Newey says, you know what, I think staying at Red Bull makes more sense, which is probably the sensible option, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's over yet, because if Aston Martin or Ferrari really want to throw around the type of money and commitment and resources that they might be eager to, it's possible that negotiations could still continue. Sure, they might have offered Newey something that he said no to, doesn't necessarily stop them coming back again. We know that in Lewis Hamilton's case, he was approached by Ferrari multiple times, and he said, you know what, no, I like the Mercedes family, I want to stay, I don't think what you guys are offering is more compelling than what I'm getting offered here at Mercedes. And then it just took one little push from Mercedes and, you know, one little extra pull factor from Ferrari, and then bang, the deal was done, right? So I think when Hamilton joins Ferrari, it's impossible to rule out anything entirely, but we'll see how things trend, of course, going forward. Just wanted to mention this, of course, with the Chinese Grand Prix coming up next weekend. These are number of wins in Formula 1 since the most recent Chinese Grand Prix. 52 for Max, almost half of races, which is kind of crazy to think about. Since the last Chinese Grand Prix in 2019 have been won by Verstappen, another quarter, of course, by Lewis Hamilton, 6 for Bottas, 6 for Perez, 5 for Leclerc, 3 for Sainz, and then 1 for Vettel, Gasly, Ocon, Ricciardo, and Russell, respectively. Yeah, Monza 2021, what a time. But very much intrigued your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.